The iPhone celebrates its 5th birthday, and Apple introduces the new podcast app on its next episode of My Apple Podcast. Hi everyone, Tim Brown. Welcome back to My Apple Podcast. So we are celebrating the 5th birthday of the iPhone. All right. I remember when I first purchased my iPhone, when it was first released. As a matter of fact, I had a new job at the time, and I started right after the July 4th holiday. I'm a new employee. I'm walking into a new job with my new iPhone. And I remember no one liked it. Everyone thought I was walking around with a big toy that had no value whatsoever, especially compared to the BlackBerry. Of course, we don't want to talk about RIM right now. Of course, Steve Jobs announced it back in January of that year. Here's a short clip.
Revolutionary mobile phone and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone.
So I actually had to go ahead and pull out my old iPhone. And here it is. This is what the iPhone originally looked like. It had an aluminum back, the black plastic along the side. You notice the aluminum wrapped around the sides as well. It really influenced the overall look and feel of it. When the iPhone 3G and 3GS came out, it completely changed the design. Let's look at them together. You turn them around, you can see that the aluminum dominates the original design, but the black plastic dominates the second one. And I hate to say it, but because the black plastic dominates the 3GS, it looks a little cheaper than the original. So I think the original is still a classic design-wise. How does it fare to the iPhone 4S? Well, I think the iPhone 4S is unique in and of itself. I mean, it's completely redesigned. It's more squared off. You really got to appreciate the iPhone 4S aesthetically as well. I think they're both really good designs, but the iPhone original is still a classic. Let's look at the original boxes. Here's the original iPhone box. You notice it's a lot larger. This is the iPhone 3GS. So the original iPhone box was actually much larger. And it really does feel a lot bulkier than the 3GS. Although when you weigh both the original iPhone and the iPhone 4S, interestingly enough, the iPhone 4S actually feels heavier. Anyway, happy birthday, iPhone. So Apple released its new podcast app. And I must say that I'm very excited about it, and I think you will too. Even those of you who are fans of the other apps, particularly Instacast and Downcast. I read some of the reviews in iTunes. There were actually some people who did not like this app at all and who actually made reference to Downcast and Instacast as still their all-time favorites. I can understand why it's hard to get rid of something that you've grown attached to. But let's be honest, the podcast app is so much better than the other applications, namely because Apple once again put its designers to good use and put together yet another great looking application. This application looks just as good as GarageBand. You ever look at GarageBand and just look at all those beautiful 3D graphics? Well, they use the same design for the podcast app. It's just beautifully designed, and especially for the iPad. Now you have to admit, when you look at Downcast and Instacast, they look horrible on the iPad. Absolutely horrible. I hate to say it, but compared, there really is no comparison to this new podcast app. Well, let's go over some of the features. I'm actually going to show it behind me on the screen so you can check out some of the features as I go through them. First, there's the catalog. So when you go to the catalog, you basically go to like the iTunes store or anything. This is just for podcasts. And you have all the podcasts that you can choose from. You also have the option to click top charts. So you can look at what's on the top charts as far as podcasts are concerned. You won't find mine, unfortunately. You can also search for podcasts, and that's where you can find my podcast. by just tapping into the search window and typing in your choice. You also have a choice to search by category. So you can tap the category button, and then you can scroll up and down and go through all the categories. There's also an interesting button along the bottom, the redeem button. Now I saw this in a previous article, probably it was Macworld or 9to5Mac or some site like that. They had mentioned something about this redeem button, so I was curious. So I quickly went to it to see exactly what happened when you clicked on it. And what happens is you get a little message. It says enter your gift card or download code. Now, why would you download code for a podcast? Well, because some podcasts require subscriptions. So people are actually paying for podcasts, which means, is Apple going to charge a 30% to people now who are charging? That's going to be interesting. I really like podcasts because they're free, but there are a lot of people out there who are charging, and because of the popularity of podcasts, maybe Apple is seeing this as an opportunity to bring in some revenue. Who knows? But the redeem button is very interesting as far as that's concerned. So you download your podcast through the catalog, and then you return to your library. And one thing you're going to notice when you get to the library mode is that everything is now presented in this beautiful tile view. You do have the option to look at them in list view if you want, but I prefer tile view. And when you tap on each one, they come to the surface as if elevated in air, the same way it does with the other applications, iBooks and so forth. And you can browse through all the episodes that are available. And then when you're done, well, before you go, you can actually click the message button to email, tweet, or send a text message. And then you just tap on the screen and it returns. It's a beautiful interface. And when you compare it once again to Instacast and Downcast, there really is no comparison. This design is absolutely stunning. And if you're not convinced in this mode, tap on Top Stations. When you tap on Top Stations, and that's where the beauty of Apple's design really comes through. You see this little banner along the top. It's almost kind of like a wheel, a rotating wheel that you slide back and forth to go through all the different categories, and there are tons of them: arts, business, comedy, education, government, health, and so forth, all the way down to technology. And as you're going through the different categories, you can tap on the episode that you want, and immediately starts to play. So it's really cool. There's also an option too to switch back and forth between audio and video modes. So I think hands down, this application is better than any podcast app that's out there. I hate to say it, I'm one of those too. Trust me, I was addicted to Instacast. I listened to it every single day religiously. It was my app of choice. But I have to say, this new podcast app is so much better. I'm sold. Well, I'll leave it up to you to determine what app you like best, since we all choose our tech things because they matter to us personally. That's why I have my Apple Podcast. It's really personal, but at some point we do come to a common ground, but for the most part, it begins with personal. How does everything integrate into our own personal workflows in terms of what we enjoy and what we get out of each individual application or device, depending on our own individual preferences. So I'll leave it up to you. But I think the podcast app is wonderful, beautifully designed. Kudos to Apple one more time. Anyway, thanks for tuning in for this episode of My Apple Podcast. My name is Tim Brown. Check me out at myapplepodcast.com or email any comments or suggestions at myapplepodcast@gmail.com.